In conversation with Eleanor Anstruther. Eleanor was born in London, educated at Westminster School, and studied history of art at Manchester University, where she was distracted from finishing her degree by a trip to India. She was lost and found for the next 12 years, starting a commune, building a stone circle, and traveling through Asia, Australia, Africa, and America before finally settling down to write. Our acclaimed debut novel, A Perfect Explanation Short Books, was longlisted for the Desmond Elliott Prize. Since 2022, she has built a readership on Substack where she published the Literary Obsessive showcase for her work before it goes to print. Our latest novel, In Judgement of Others, comes out in January 2025 and it's available to pre-order now. And in today's episode of Auto Interview, it's my utmost pleasure, joy, and excitement to have on the show today, Eleanor Anstruther. How are you doing, Helena?
I'm doing really well, Peter. How are you doing?
I'm doing very fine too. It's an hot afternoon here in Nigeria. Quite lovely to be joining your conversation today. Thanks for coming on.
For having me. Great to be here.
Yeah. So, Helena, I'd like you to tell us about your upcoming novel because I know you've written others too. But then I'd
Hmm.
like us to start today's conversation with one of your books, your upcoming one, In
Sure.
Judgment of Others, which is set to be released next year, the 28th of January, 2025. I would like to ask you, how does this book come about? What inspired you to write Judgment of Others? And how did you even come up with that name for a book too?
Sure. Okay. Well, I've got an advanced copy here so that your viewers can see the
Beautiful
beautiful
cover you've
cover.
got in there.
Really pleased with it. And in fact, the town that's in the background of that
Mm,
is Midhurst, which is a town in West Sussex, which is about 40 minutes south of here.
wow.
I grew up around here and in London, so I know this part of the world really well. And readers of the book, when you get it, you'll see that it's dedicated to my impossible friend. And that person who is going to remain nameless for reasons which will become obvious when you read the book. But
Mm,
that person was the inspiration, a friend of mine for this book. She was the inspiration for the lead character, Tessa,
mm,
because it's an exploration about psychosis or mental illness. And I'm talking about clinical mental illness
yeah.
that which would be hospitalized or, in Tessa's case, sectioned.
Mm,
And the book is an exploration of why we treat different clinical mental health conditions differently according to society's bias.
oh, wow.
And so the book came about because of my impossible friend and her lifelong struggle with a bipolar diagnosis, witnessing it and witnessing how differently other people who had conditions which were just as devastating to the community around them, how
Yeah.
differently they were and are treated.
Mm,
I won't give away, or perhaps I will later on give away what the other condition is that I really put up against bipolar. But I
mm,
felt outraged by it because she's not the only one who causes devastation. It's not to say that bipolar isn't a very, very serious condition. And my impossible friend has been sectioned many times, and for her own safety and that of her children. It's just the disparity between that and other conditions, which are just as devastating to the society they live in.
wow. That's such a lovely one into that, really. That's such a lovely way into coming into becoming an author. Quite amazing to get to know about, oh, in judgment of others, how it come to be. Thank you so much for sharing. That's a
Not
lovely
at all. And in
story.
fact, I didn't answer the second bit of your question, actually, why the title In Judgment of Others?
Yeah.
And that is significant, if I can, because it's so much about judgment. And
Mm,
I compare it, not in the book, but in other interviews that I've had around the story, the difference in the way that society treats those who are diagnosed with cancer and those who are diagnosed with
mm,
HIV. That's the difference. There's a bias there. And so I really wanted to compare these different mental health conditions and the judgment that people bestow on them and the person who is dealing with that condition. So
Mm.
I wanted to bring judgment like front and center, which is why it's really front and center of the book, and ask readers to examine their own judgments as they witness the judgments of the characters
Oh,
throughout the story.
wow. Oh, wow, that's a beautiful one. And I love your illustration in there, trying to compare how people judge people who are diagnosed with cancer differently from those who are diagnosed with HIV, which is very, very interesting. And it's even
Mm,
something that's quite particular, even in your own word, and even here
mm,
in Africa, people have a
mm,
different judgment with people diagnosed with different diseases. Yeah,
yeah.
that's something very amazing to talk about, really. That's quite amazing
Mm.
to, expand a bit into. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. And one of the things I've really noticed, and this goes with cancer and with other mental health conditions and
Yeah.
HIV and bipolar, is that it tends to be, if you're diagnosed with cancer, there's a great outpouring of compassion, so there should be. With HIV, it tends to be kind of caveated with a bit of blame
Mm,
around it. So it's that kind of, deeply unfair
mm.
bias I really wanted to explore in the mental health field.
Absolutely. Oh, thank you so much. And now I know we've talked a bit about that, but then I still like to ask you, for readers
Mm,
who haven't read the book yet, and of course
mm,
without giving much information away, could you have
mm.
a sneak of what you would expect in terms of themes and subject lines picking up in Judgment of Others?
Sure. Themes, we look at belonging and loneliness and jealousy.
Wow.
We look at mental health. We look at marriage. We look at friendship between women and storylines. Yeah, there's comedy in it. I have to tell you that as well. It's a I call it a dark satire, really, because
Wow.
it it circles around in terms of plot, it circles around an amateur dramatic society in Midhurst who put on a performance of Blithe Spirit at Noel Coward play. And Tessa, this is not too much of a reveal because it happens in the very first chapter, has a psychotic breakdown and is sectioned within the very first 20 pages of the book. And the book takes place within the psychiatric unit where the patients there also put on Blithe Spirit. So we've got this double storyline going on, and there's
Yeah.
enormous breadth for comedy within that, as well as the darkness and seriousness of being sectioned.
Wow.
And so it really moves between light and dark throughout the entire novel.
Wow. That's
Mm.
amazing, really. That's quite lovely. Thank you so much for sharing. And also, you also have another book in the name of a memoir in 65 podcast and the
I,
Discovery Diaries. A memoir
Mhm.
in 65 postcards and the Recovery Diaries. Would you also love to tell us a bit about the making of this particular book? And if you have a copy there.
So my memoir, there it
Oh,
is. Um, and that really came to life because I joined Substack. Substack has been completely revolutionary. I don't know whether you're on it, Peter, but I'll have a look or let me know. Um, but I had my debut came out and did really well. And then I wrote three subsequent novels, and all three fell at the first hurdles, and they weren't picked up, and we just couldn't sell them. So they were sitting in a drawer, and I was feeling pretty depressed about the whole thing, I can tell you now. And
wow.
then a friend and I were chatting like this on Zoom, and we talked about needing to sort of regain agency in our writing career. So I went on Substack, which is a place where you can write and press publish. That's it, and you've got absolutely direct relationship with your readers. And as a kind of experiment, as I began my kind of exploration of that platform, I thought I would write something every day, write and publish every day. And the thing that I wrote and published every day could be no longer or could take no longer than 1 minute to read. That was the bounds I set myself. So it couldn't take more than a minute to read. I had to write it and publish it every day, every morning, basically, and also do no research whatsoever and just see what bubbled up. And it was
Wow.
based on Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way, the idea behind it. So I started doing that, and what bubbled up after about 3 or 4 weeks was my memoir, which I then sort of wrote and published in real time every day. It came out in 65 postcards, which is why that bit's called that.
Wow.
And then when I finished that, I knew I hadn't quite finished. So I began immediately the recovery diaries, which were based on exactly the same premise. So write it every day, take no longer than a minute to read. And there are 108 of those. And that those two, the 65 postcards and the recovery diaries, formed by the time I'd finished it what was clearly a complete memoir and essays and things that I really needed to say and get off my chest.
Wow.
And it gained me a really substantial following on Substack, from which I've grown. And I thought, well, why not publish it? But because I'm not famous, I couldn't submit it to a publisher. So I went to Troubadour. So it's indie published with Troubadour, who have been amazing. I really recommend anybody to go and use them if you're in my position. And here it is, and I'm super proud of it. And it is available now
Beautiful.
globally, online, and in all good bookshops. Just Google the name and you'll find it. Go to my website and you'll find links there. Really thrilled about it, and now I don't have to carry those stories in my head anymore because they're
Yeah,
on page.
I particularly love the description of the book page. When I read through its page on Amazon, it was quite amazing to me. Very wholesome and quite amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a friend who's currently reading it, and she keeps emailing me and saying they just feel like little prose poetry, like little vignettes. They sort of came out as little vignettes. And, when you do read it, you'll realize, or at least I realized while I was doing it, I tried to write a memoir many times because you'll see the stories that are in there. And it was just too large. It was too big.
Wow.
I couldn't get it. So this happened by accident, and because it was such tiny bites.
Mm.
I don't know if you've read Bird by Bird, the Anne Lamott
Oh, no.
writing. Okay, well, if anyone who's struggling with their work, that's always the go-to book, Bird by Anne Lamott. And what she recommends if you're struggling with an idea that you just can't make it work, you just work bird by bird, just piece by tiny. You take a tiny bit
Mm,
and put it down, a tiny bit. So you break it down into tiny sections,
mm.
which inadvertently is exactly what I did with the memoir material. I didn't
Wow.
know that's what I was doing, but I'm sure you have this experience, Peter, as a writer. The material often knows better than the writer, and
Absolutely. Oh,
it,
wow.
and it will find a way out. And this is how it found its way out.
Oh, wow. The material is often more better than the writer. I love the line, really. Very true. Quite amazing. It's something that I myself can relate to personally. So, yeah,
Yeah.
thank you so much for mentioning and giving an idea on
Mm.
it. Thank you so much.
It's my debut.
Yeah, we're gonna go into this now. I love this now. So I also wanted to ask you because I found the description page of your historical novel, a perfect
Mm.
explanation, which is long
Mm.
listed for the Desmond Elliott Prize in 2019, to be quite enthralling and extremely compelling. And I would
Thank
like you to tell us a bit about the making of it without giving much away.
Sure thing. Yeah, so that was my debut, the book I cut my teeth on, and on which I learned how to write. And it took me a
Mm.
decade to write. And it
Wow.
came about because it's based on a family story. It was widely known within my family that my father was sold by his mother to his aunt. And it was a
Wow.
very casual, uh, it was a casual sentence around the lunch table. Do you know what I mean? Wasn't a kind of like dramatic piece of knowledge. And I reached a point in my life when I suddenly thought, why isn't that a remarkable thing? Like, why isn't that treated as something extraordinary? There's clearly there's a story there, but nobody was particularly within the family taking any notice of it. So I was thinking about it and thinking about it. And my father had a brother called Fergus, and I was meditating in my studio one day, unable to write whatever it was I was trying to write.
Mm.
And Fergus, who I never met, he died in 1917, came to me in a kind of vision. And all he said to me was, find my grave. That's what he said, find my
Wow.
grave. I went to my dad and I said, look, this has happened. Where's Fergus buried? And he said, oh no, it doesn't exist. It's been built over by flats. And I thought that can't be true.
Mm.
So what my father did have was a little slip of paper that had a grave number on it, and I knew it was in Littlehampton Cemetery. So I went down there and I found it. I found the plot. It was
Mm.
unmarked. And so I went back to my father, who I knew had been sold by his mother to his aunt, and I knew he had a brother who died in 1917, and said, "Okay, I want to I want to write this. I didn't know what I was going to write, to be honest. I
Mm.
spent a year reading every single piece in the family archive
Wow.
and uncovered a story that really made sense of so much to do with the experience of growing up in my family. And I set about to write that book. But I mean, it took 7 years to really understand what the story was I was trying to tell. I wrote it from scratch 4 times, 4 completely different novels. Each novel I
Wow.
wrote 15, 20 drafts of each. I mean, it was really a labor of love. But by the end,
Mm.
I had a novel, and that novel I took to the Festival of Writers in York, where I signed with an agent, and we got a deal with Salt Books, and it came out. So it was a all in all, it was a 15-year voyage, 10 years to
Mm.
write it, and 5 years, to finally have it on the bookshelves.
Oh, wow.
And it put a lot of ghosts to bed. I don't know if you've had this experience, Peter, of writing anything to do with family, but there
Mm.
are so many ghosts flying about with family, and so many things unsaid, and so many things buried. And it was an excavation and a laying to rest. And
Mm.
yeah, it was much more than the sum of its parts in as my experience.
Oh,
Yeah, so I was
wow.
really grateful you handed the story and tried to do my best by it.
That's an amazing one, really. That sounds like a very pulling, compelling story you've got
Mm.
into the book, yeah? Thank you so much for mentioning. And even from there,
Yeah,
looking and browsing through the book, you can easily tell that this is such an amazing story. The feedbacks on them too are quite great, quite amazing.
yeah. I mean, it did really well, and I think one of the things that was I learned from that book at the
Mm,
time. I just That was completely normal. You wrote a book, you sold it, you got reviewed in the Guardian, you went on Woman's Hour, you're on TV. I
yeah.
thought that was totally normal. What I've discovered since is that's not normal at all. And I had miraculously a really amazing burst onto the scene, and then it was a bit like being flown to the top of the mountain and then sent back to the bottom again. And ever since then, I've been having to walk all the
Mm,
way back again, and I'm still walking. But and that's the way of it. The truth of it is that all writers, and I'm sure, Peter, this is your experience, your
yeah.
career doesn't do that. You don't get
Yeah.
published and just totally go up. It does that. And it's really
S-
hard work. It's hard to keep the faith, isn't it? You
Ups and
get
down.
really great, and then you just get thrown to your knees. And so yeah, I had an amazing beginning, and then I had 3 books turned down,
Wow.
and I had to find my mettle, decide if this was the career I really wanted, which it is, and just, you know, put one foot in front of the other and be determined about it.
Interesting. Oh, wow. I love your take on that. That is quite compelling and very wholesome. Thank you so much
Thanks.
for sharing. Now, I'd like us to talk
Mm,
about readers' feedback. One of the most interesting things to me as a writer is to listen to readers' feedbacks. And you may want to agree with me that one of the things that make literature to be complex in its entirety is the fact that it can be interpreted in different ways by different readers based on their opinions. Sometimes the readers might get a message intended by the author. Sometimes they might be close to getting the message. Sometimes they might be far or very far away from getting the message. And sometimes they might hilariously misunderstand the entire message. And as interestingly fun as it sounds, I would like to ask you particularly, how do you feel when readers interpret your works differently
mhm.
than you intended? How does it make you feel?
Yeah, I've got a few different experiences of this. I'll start with the most recent. In Judgement of Others
Mm,
began its life on Substack as a serialized piece of fiction. So I was posting chapters weekly and getting feedback on a weekly basis from
yeah.
people reading it as is. So they didn't know where the book was going. So they were commenting blind, as it were. They were commenting as they were going along, which meant that because of the way the book's written, there was a lot of blind alleys to go down, which and unreliable witnesses as characters. So readers were reporting back to me things about characters which I knew, obviously knowing the whole book, were completely off, but I couldn't say anything because that would have ruined the reveal of those characters. So that was a really interesting experience. It was all positive, so I didn't have to deal with any unsolicited criticism
Yeah.
of work, which I think, I have a kind of rule really with work. If somebody has managed to get a piece of work up and on its feet, and
Mm,
especially published, it's
mm,
incredibly hard to do that. And if
yeah.
he doesn't particularly like that work on a kind of personal opinion basis, I don't think that's really to be said out on a public forum. Who needs to know that? Do you know what I mean? It's really hard to get a piece of work out. If it's
Mm,
kind of critical thinking, discussion, comparing, that's a completely different thing. But if it's a
mm.
kind of, oh, I don't like the way you keep it to yourself. Do you know what I mean? Write your own. You know what I mean? Because it's like it's really hard. But I have to
Yeah.
say, I haven't ever experienced that. I've experienced a couple of people saying, "Oh, it's a bit slow about different work. Or it's a bit slow in parts or something," which is a bit like, is it though? Really? I think not convinced it is. But that's Goodreads for you, and
Yeah.
you run the gauntlet
Goodreads.
on Goodreads, and some authors love it, some authors absolutely hate it. It can send you down a real rabbit hole. It can bring you
Yeah.
to your knees. You take your chances on Goodreads and on Amazon. But I mean, I thankfully
Mm,
I've never had a terrible experience. Oh no, I've had one actually.
mm,
I had a review in The Guardian, which any review in The Guardian is going to be good, even if it's a terrible review. And the reviewer really, I think she was just not keen on me and the status that I sort of personified in the writing of the debut, which is the kind of English or Scottish aristocratic kind of position, which I don't,
mm,
all of those things are just stupid anyway. But it sort of felt like she took against me a bit.
mm.
And that was kind of mortifying because it was the first time I had a review in The Guardian, which was a
Oh,
big deal.
wow.
And she wasn't saying this is the best thing I've ever read. That was quite like,
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Christ. Anyway, but then yeah, so that was my experience of it. But with a perfect explanation in terms
Yeah.
of interpretation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had the very interesting experience of people interpreting it in ways, seeing things that I hadn't seen, which is always really surprising. Like
Mm,
and interpreting it in ways that hadn't at all dawned on me. And I think that happens a lot, either because they're genuinely seeing stuff that we don't see because we're too much in the thick of it,
yeah.
or they're just relating to something specifically that really kind of blooms in their own mind.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think I always think of readers as the sort of they're part of the creative process.
Mm,
They finish the piece of work, I always feel. It's a bit like theatre audiences sort
mm,
of complete the piece of theatre. And I feel readers complete the piece of work, which is why I need my books to be read. I can't just write and put them in a drawer. That's not enough. I need them to get out there and be read and be completed in the reflection in the
mm,
eyes of the readers. And that means a
mm,
lot to me. I'm always interested to
mm,
hear how a piece of work lands and how it differs from. Well, I don't really have intentions around work. All I ever intend is that to be as good as I can possibly make it, and
oh,
I try and
wow.
leave interpretation like you can make your own mind up. I tend to not lead the witness in terms of characters. Like I tend to leave it like you can just. There's no obvious good person or bad person. I like to leave it much more as life is. We're
Mm,
nuanced.
oh, wow. This is such an amazing one, really. I enjoy your answer to this question. To me, it
Thanks.
sounds quite engaging. Very, it's one that spike in for the conversation. It is quite educative. It is very amazing. One that even to be authors can listen to and learn in. So thank you so much for an amazing feedback. And I can relate to most of the things you talk about, being such a different experience with different people and our readers get to interpret works a bit different, slightly different, close to the meaning. And it's a lot in there really. Thank you so much,
Mhm.
Helena, for sharing.
My
Yeah,
pleasure.
thank you. And now, apart from the books we've mentioned so far, apart from your upcoming release and the books we've mentioned so far, do you have any other works you've authored or say currently working on?
Yeah, I've currently got another novel that I'm streaming on Substack, and it's also going out on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. It's called
Wow.
Fallout, and it's about a teenage girl who runs away to Greenham Common Women's Peace Camp. Um, do you know what Greenham Common was? You're probably too young, Peter, to know what it was. Does it ring any bells?
No.
Okay, I'll tell you because this is the reason why I wrote this book because Greenham Common should be known certainly throughout the United Kingdom, and in terms of the protest movement, it should be known globally. It was a
Oh.
protest that was begun in 1981 by four women in Wales who walked from Cardiff to Berkshire in England to protest the sighting of nuclear missiles on British soil
Oh, wow.
because they had been brought there according to an agreement between Reagan and Thatcher without the say-so or even the discussion for the British public. And these were armed nuclear weapons, okay? And there they were
Mm.
being housed on British soil as a kind of threat to Moscow. So these
Wow.
four women were outraged by this, as I think any thinking person would, especially as the British government sent out a pamphlet called Protect and Survive, which said if they happen to go off, hide under the table. I mean, it was just an insult to everyone concerned. So they walked to the military airbase thinking that they'd sort of bring up some sort of interest, and nothing happened. The papers weren't interested. In fact, the guards thought they were the cleaners and let them into the military airbase. So
Mm.
the women decided to chain themselves to the fence. Nothing happened. So they set up camp. Nothing happened. So they stayed for a year. Nothing happened. Nobody was
Wow.
interested in. And so they decided to hold a real protest, and they sent out leaflets hand to hand
Mm.
of an action called Embrace the Base, which was to embrace the 9 mile perimeter fence, holding hands of women holding hands around the fence as a protest, just to try and bring this to the attention of the British public.
Mm.
And on December the 12th, and this is before mobile phones, before the internet, before everything, 1982, December the 12th, 30,000 women turned up in the rain in Berkshire and held hands around the 9 mile perimeter fence of Greenham Common. And
Wow.
Greenham Common Women's Peace was born. And it stayed there in situ, protesting and bringing awareness
Mm.
for 19 years.
Wow.
And in that time, I think it was probably 15 years, they achieved their aim. The missiles were removed. Gorbachev and Reagan signed the peace accord, and they
Mm.
cited the protest by the Greenham women as part of their reason to dismantle the nuclear threat between the two nations. So that's pretty
Wow.
big stuff, right? But it's not taught in schools. The protesters, they used non-violent direct action, which
Mm.
Extinction Rebellion have borne the mantle of, and which was begun by Gandhi. So this is really, a significant place in the history of protest, the
Mm.
Greenham Common protest, and it's absolutely not known about, apart from people who were of an age then,
Wow.
and who are. Do you know what I mean? You get Gandhi, you get civil rights, you get suffragettes, you get Extinction Rebellion, and you get
Wow.
Greenham Common. But all the other ones I've just mentioned are very famous. Greenham Common, not at all. So I grew up in the 1980s. I was aware of it. I was outraged that it wasn't known. So I wrote a novel about a girl,
Mm.
15-year-old Bridget, who runs away to Greenham Common. And it's about how Greenham changes her. And it's about putting your Greenham principles where your mouth is. And
Oh,
the other
wow.
aspect of, just to mention, which is really significant, I've interviewed a lot of Greenham Common women who are now in their 70s and 80s. And I've asked all of them if there was ever a question around what defined a woman in terms of that, because it will arise when this book is published. I often get asked this question: could this story have been written now? And the truth of it is, could Greenham Common Women's Peace Camp exist now? And it
Mm.
couldn't exist now because we've entered a stage where there's an awful lot of discussion about identity and gender and what is a woman. So
Mm.
I was really interested to ask the Greenham Common women, did that ever come up? And they said no. Now, if there's a Greenham Common woman watching this and she wants to correct me, please do. But in all of my research, it
Yeah.
became very clear that as long as you identified as a woman,
Oh,
that was
wow.
it. Nobody looked under the bonnet there. It wasn't because that wasn't the point. The point was nuclear disarmament and reclaiming the common land. So
Mm.
I think that's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard, and that it's significant, and that does. There's a theme of that without giving anything away. There's a theme of that running through the book. So that's streaming
Wow.
now on Substack, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. If you go to my Substack, you'll find the table of contents. You'll be able to go back to the beginning and start right there at the introduction. Um, and yeah, jump on board. I'm really proud of it.
Wow. Wow, that's
Publisher
such.
yet, so this is watching. He wants to offer me a deal. And can I just say as well, publishers out there who want to offer me a deal, it is the
Mm.
very first piece of literary fiction set at Greenham Common ever.
Wow.
So my agent and I were kind of amazed that this wasn't enough of a pitch to sell it to the mainstream. If
Oh,
you are the
wow.
mainstream and you never got sent this submission and you think this is a good idea, which it is, it's going down a storm on Substack. They're loving it. And that
Mm.
includes the Americans. And it's a very English-centric novel. I really think it deserves to get out there as a book. So please give us a call.
Oh, wow. That's an amazing response you've gotten there, Eleanor. Quite
Mhm.
educative. I jot down some things when you were speaking that I'd love to look up later on Google and make some more research on for myself. Yeah. Thank you so much for an amazing feedback, for a lovely, detailed explanation, an educative one you've got in there. Thanks for the storyline as well. I enjoyed listening to it. Thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you.
well, it was fun writing. I finished it last year, but it's very fun writing a teenage girl because a lot of my books are my age or a little bit younger, or a little bit older. But writing a teenager, I don't know if you've done that piece, but writing a teenager is a lot of fun because they've got such black and white thinking. There's no nuance. They're just like, I like this, I don't like that. Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
they're really, really fun to write. And it's in terms of theme, I
Yeah.
mean, it's a coming of age story. Obviously, it's a coming of age story.
Yeah, yeah, thank you so much. And as a published author, what sort of advice do you have for other writers who are still struggling with publishing a book? What would you advise people in this category? And also, just in case you have some people who are currently watching this interview and would love to get a copy of any of your books, on what platform are they available on for purchase?
I'll start with that last question. They're available online and in all good bookshops. So if you just Google my name, go into Amazon, whether you're in the UK or globally,
Mm,
Waterstones, Hive, bookshop.org, Troubadour for the latest novel, or just go into your local bookshop and ask. You will find me and my book. So you can go to my website, eleanoranstruther.com, and all links are there.
uh,
And advice, well, gird your loins. It's a long and tough road. You have good days and bad days. If you're
mm,
struggling, you have a completed manuscript and you're struggling to get representation. So if you're trying to get an agent, just keep going. Think about going to Jericho if you're in the UK. That's the
mm,
Writers' Festival. Keep your opening letters short and to the point and friendly, and manage your expectations. But basically, keep going is really the best piece of advice. If you have a finished manuscript that you're struggling to get published
mm,
and you don't have an agent, not all publishing houses will take manuscripts straight from the author. Some will, and it'll be in their blurb. I would have a look at being an indie author, and
mm,
there's a great, got the name to hand, but there are some very, very good resources out there for independent authors. That's authors who
yeah,
are publishing books themselves.
yeah,
Production values have really gone up in the last 20 years. So
absolutely.
don't be shy of doing it yourself, depending on your resources. If you've got some resources to hand, Troubadour are brilliant. They're a hybrid. If
Mm,
you haven't and you want to just go straight to, is it called KPD, the Amazon Kindle? That's a very good way of doing it, print on demand. Nothing wrong with that. The,
mm,
mo- the place to put your money, if you are an indie author, is
mm,
in copy editing. Make sure that you're proofreading and copy editing. I think I've got the name wrong, but make hire somebody who is
yeah,
going to check your text
yeah,
and make sure it is of top quality standard, because
quality.
what lets independent authors down
Mm,
is they don't splash out on proofreaders and text edits. So for goodness sake, do that,
mm,
and your layouts and your covers and all that kind of stuff. But also
yeah,
the place. where I would put, if you've got any resources, it's in publicity, trying to get visibility. That it's very, very difficult for indie authors to get visibility.
Mm,
Substack is a really, really great place. It depends what genre you're writing in. There's a fantastic a cohort of science fiction, fantasy fiction, romance, crime, thriller indie authors. Literary fiction is a little bit more rare. Um, there's not so many of us doing it,
yeah.
but no reason not to do it. But the advice is keep going, believe in what you're doing, and be absolutely the best you can be. Like, don't let it out the door
Mm,
unless you know it's really good.
oh, wow.
That's for all of us because that brings up the reputation of indie.
Yeah.
And I'm an Indiana mainstream author, and I had a great experience with Salt Books. They were absolutely brilliant, and I fully intend to be a mainstream author again.
Mm,
Do both. I really enjoy working as an indie and as a mainstream author, and I believe the two models can work in tandem, hand in hand.
mm,
But yeah, keep going. Don't you agree, Peter? It's you just got to have such fortitude in this work and reach out to other writers
mm.
and join communities and talk about it and say yes to everything. That's what I do. I say yes to everything. And
Oh,
readers are your
wow.
absolutely most valuable asset. I send out books to book clubs. I turn up at book clubs. I'll do, whatever. Like, every single reader counts. Every reader,
Yes.
whether they are a judge on the Booker Prize or your next door neighbor, they are of equal value. Every reader counts.
Absolutely. Every reader can't. I love that statement. And that's an amazing trunkload of advice you've given to us. Thank you so much for sharing. And I'm hoping, actually, that viewers, even including myself, would love to utilize it. And also, for the sake of readers who love to get a copy of Eleanor Anstruther's books, I left a link in the description part of this interview where interested viewers can get a copy of our books directly on Amazon, Barnes& and Nobles, on our website, and also another platform. I also left a link to our social media pages for possible followings. So thank you
Mm.
so much, Eleanor, for accepting the invitation to be featured on P English Literature. I must say
Oh,
it's more than awesome, very educative, quite inspiring, quite motivating, awesome and brilliant having this lovely conversation with you around your beautiful, amazing title, Memoirs. I enjoyed it wholeheartedly, and thank you so much for coming on.
thank you so much, Peter. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's my pleasure as well.